everybody. Hello
Hello.
to everyone watching from wherever you happen to be in the world. Thank you for joining us for what I hope will be a constructive dialogue on what needs to happen for a lasting peace between Israel and Palestine. We welcome your attendance and we look forward to your participation. Briefly, I will introduce myself as you're here to listen to our panelists and not me. My name is Jason Sylvester, and I am the Digital Media Director and Board Member for AAI. As AAI is the only organization representing non-believers with observer status at the United Nations, it is my personal belief that our alliance, together with its affiliates, should be discussing how religion is adding fuel to this humanitarian disaster and what possible solutions might become available if we focus on the human aspects. That is why I have brought these two speakers here today. I stress my personal belief. All three of us here today represent organizations, but everyone is here speaking as an individual. Anything said today will be our opinions and in no way reflect our respective organizations. That said, as a historical researcher, particularly on the history of religion, I feel I can bring some historical perspective to this discussion, and I will be drawing upon my research throughout our chat to highlight some key facts, and I will provide links in the chat for viewers to verify my statements. Let me stress, I am not a credentialed historian nor a Mideast policy expert, just a very well-read researcher. I am a humanist and I desire to see a lasting peace for both sides. I am pro-Israel just as I am equally pro-Palestine. I want to see a fair deal for the Palestinians and security for the Israelis. In essence, I would like to see basic human decency and rights for all. Fundamentally, I view this crisis and the possible solutions as a human rights issue. Not every Palestinian is a terrorist, not every Israeli is a West Bank extremist. The regular people on both sides want peace. Palestinians want self determination and economic opportunities. Israelis want security. Perhaps there is a way forward. Perhaps I'm being naive, but I remain hopeful that peace can be achieved in time. One initial caution: as this is a dialogue for peace, any comments from people demeaning either side of this issue will be removed. Intolerance will not be tolerated. We're here to discuss a way forward, not to see unhelpful comments defaming others. Now to our guests. So, Raja Khalidi is a highly educated economist with an MSc from the University of London. Raja previously worked at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development from 1985 to 2013 and was the coordinator of its program of assistance to the Palestinian people from 2000 to 2006. He is an expert on the economy and the development policies in Palestine. Raja, welcome and thank you for coming. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Right. Thank you very much for initiating this discussion. And I'm always happy to talk about Palestinian rights with whoever. So I'm also for the first time meeting you and your institution, as well as Amir and his and the discussion that comes. So I'm, open to that. But at the same time, as we'll see, we all have different opinions and different readings and different sources of information. On the other hand, as an economist, who's really, I do not participate generally in political discussions or try and or claim to have any specialist political knowledge. But as an economist of Palestine, you can only be political. So, political economy is the defining term of what we are as economists in Palestine, looking at, what's not only what's going on now, but to understand the economy. And I've been living here in Palestine for the last 10 years, though the rest of my life I was outside the United States, Europe, Lebanon, professionally and family wise. Today, I'm retired, but still working as an economist with a local institution, research institution. And
Yeah.
I would add that I have a Palestinian Arab Israeli wife and in-laws, and hence my children have Israeli nationality, though they are Palestinian refugees. So they've sort of gained their right to return legally within the existing system. I'm an American citizen myself, only.
Thank you. And the economy is definitely going to be a key issue to the way forward. So thank you for that. All right. So now to our Israeli. So Amir is a social political activist and a high-tech startup founder and a secular Israeli. Prior to October 7th, he was very active in the protests over Netanyahu's administration. I think it is safe to say he is no admirer of Netanyahu or his policies, and he brings a non-religious perspective to this problem that his fellow Orthodox citizens are unable to see. Amir, welcome and thank you for coming. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I'll just elaborate on what Jason said. So my profession was high-tech most of the time, and as an high-tech entrepreneur, I wasn't involved in the past 10 or so years in social work or social activism. In the past 2 years, I'm very active inside the liberal protest that comes in Israel, that set forth to protect the democracy in Israel and maybe strengthen it a bit, because we felt like our democracy and liberalism values are being threatened by the Netanyahu regime and by his fellow coalition members. I was always active in social until I took a break for a few years, and then I came back, as I said. My work always was from the point of view of humanism, and some atheism is, I look at it as not the main issue, but is a resulting issue of other aspects. I like to be supported by evidence, to use rationality, and not to use stuff that you can't support by facts.
Great.
I want to emphasize I'm Jewish, cultural Jewish, because I'm not religious. So my culture is Jewish. I'm very proud of my heritage. It's very important for me from the moment I wake up till I go to sleep. And I also use the word Zionist, but not in the term that became public in the past few years, because for me Zionism is no more than the idea of the Jewish people to have a land. It doesn't mean in what border or at what cost or anything. It just means that to have a homeland, and that's it. Nothing more than that.
Fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, so let me just provide a little bit of background information. Both our panelists have reviewed this information already to prepare them. So I just want a little brief background, because then Amir and Raja are going to talk about these demographics. So in 2021, an Israeli survey reveals that 45% of the population is secular, and another 25% report as non-religious but consider themselves traditionally Jewish. 10% are Haredi or ultra-Orthodox. The remaining 20% identify as religious but not Haredi. Therefore, the secular bloc is roughly 70% of the population, yet the politics are so fragmented, no government gets a clear mandate, and coalitions must be formed which include this 30% minority. Now, Christopher Hitchens, in a 2010 Slate article, talked about, or put his quote, and then I'll put the link in the chat. Hitchens was talking about how Netanyahu and the coalition are always being threatened by the religious right. Hitch states, and this is again 14 years ago, a different group of people, have the unusual ability to threaten Netanyahu from his right wing. So, Amir, so to you on these demographics, with a country with such a high secular population, can you maybe talk about why it's so hard to get a governing coalition that is secular or is not having to kowtow to the religious right?
Yeah, I think it's the toughest question that every left liberal in Israel is asking for the past, I don't know, let's say the 40 years, because the change happened, for my opinion, after the 1973 war, the Yom Kippur, or the October War of 1973. Now we have a new October War, very sadly. Anyhow, the thing is that we started a social change where people that used to vote for the left found a new home in the right wing. Most of them were seculars or observant Jews. Most of them were from Arab countries. Most of them felt like the government that failed during the 73 war didn't treat them right. And then we had a change that many seculars moved to the right wing. That was a major change, as I see. At the same time, another national religious group started believing that we need to settle the West Bank because this land was given us by God, and Israel is the fulfillment of the last days of the Messiah times, and we should settle it. Those two scenarios came at the same time. And what happened is that the national religious Jews that were supporting the left side moved to support the right side. And also those new force of Jews that came from Arab countries decided that the right wing is the home, and they started voting for it. That was the major change in Israeli politics, and it happens during the end of the 1970s, beginning of the 1980s. And now, there's another thing that happened, and it's very important to understand, especially now. And I jump. When you said religious negates secular, this is not the right division in Israel. Because there are many kinds of religious people in Israel. There are many different sects. I tell you, for example, we'll start with the extreme, the ultra-religious, the one that goes with the black clothes, that you see them, they are going with the right wing from the 1980s in one way or the other. But still, if you're talking in terms of the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, they don't care about to return lands. It's not important for them because Israel has no right to exist from their religious point of view, because they think Israel should have be established only after the Messiah will come. So those guys, so maybe they are religious, but they actually, in many ways, are supporting the left side. So you have to, this is one group. I'll go back to the national religious Jews that I was talking about. Those the ones that mostly are settling the settlements in the West Bank, but not always, not all. Some of them are living everywhere in Israel, like any other Israeli citizen. And there also are not one block. You can see that they're kind of divided. And we have, I'm following lately one of the leaders that is on the left side. He's supporting a compromise, and he's supporting peace and, of course, liberal values. So maybe the division out there is not 50-50, but it is 20-80, something like that. So not everyone is one block. So dividing Israel by seculars against religious, that's not the point. The division should be liberals against not liberals. For people who believe in democracy and human values, where the person is in the center, or the one that believe that the state, the desire of God, or God telling, they are in the right side, and they're not necessarily religious. Okay. So we have many right-wing supporters that will go to the synagogue every Friday, but when they'll go home, they light up a cigarette or open the TV, or even eat unkosher food. It's really not the same.
Okay. So given the hostilities,
I'll just finish with one sentence. Sure. What Netanyahu was able to do is to make a block of the ultra-religious parties, along with the National Religious Party and his own people that I was talking about, I won't repeat it, and made a bloc. And this bloc is the one that won the election. And the only thing that they went after, they are Netanyahu supporters. That's it. Netanyahu personally, not even his ways.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So it's not whether secular versus religious, it's liberal versus conservative. So, okay, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so to Amir, uh, what is the people's opinion to Hamas currently? I read a stat recently that most Palestinians weren't even born yet when Hamas was elected. Is that something you can confirm? Oh, you're on mute. Hang on. I unmute you. Oh, there you go. Sorry, you were muted.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, there you go.
I'd actually want to first engage a little bit with some of the issues that were raised by Amir, because I think that's really the
Okay.
issue. I mean, Hamas is a byproduct in many ways of what's been going on for the last 75 years. It's not really it was never the active factor on the Palestinian side of this conflict until 30, 40 years ago. But I think it's very interesting some of the points that were being made by Amir. Now, and I'd like to, prod the discussion in the direction of, okay, an Israel and a Zionism devoid of its religious content, right? Non-religious, not based on religion, right? What happens, therefore? Then doesn't that mean, therefore, that the claim of the Jewish people, the cultural, national claim of the Jewish people to state, to the right to a national home, as you call them, is no longer superior to that of the Palestinian people and their claim and right to a national home? In the sense, and this is a different equation when you take the religion out of the Zionism as well as out of the Palestinian resistance. Isn't it then, doesn't it sort of level the playing field somewhat? Because, one can argue that, there's a liberal Zionism and an illiberal Zionism. But I would also say that there's actually no doubt that liberal and illiberal Zionism were brought to Palestine, introduced and built, let's say, the national home was built through a settler colonial process. Now, I'm not I'm not saying that is some in itself terrible thing, but let's be honest. Facts are that, Israel built itself as the Jewish national home under the British mandate and then was able to establish a state and so on and so forth. Now, that was, I agree with Amir as well, it was a largely not at all religious Zionism. There was struggles within the Zionist movement between the liberals and the illiberals, so the Jabotinskis and the Ben-Gurions, but that struggle was not religious. In fact, when Ben-Gurion gave the special status to the Haredim that they still claim today in 1948-49, i.e. they don't have to serve in the army, etc., and they get special funding for their praying. I think the Haredim were 7% of the population. So what's happened, yeah, in 48. I mean, so that transformation, the demographic transformation that's happened, has definitely benefited the coalition that Amir referred to, that was put together by Netanyahu. But let's not mistake, and I think would be a mistake to say that the demographics are driving the ideology. No, the ideology is driving the demographics. So it's the state of Judea Samaria, right, Amir, against the state of Tel Aviv. One is liberal, one is illiberal, one is not has done enough settler colonialism and is happy with the 48 or the 67 borders. The other one has not yet finished its settler colonialism and wants to continue Gaza and now the West Bank. And so that is something that the Palestinians, so I mean, this is a struggle for the heart of Zionism, in a sense, between those two very, distinct now. And the national religious didn't just grow because of demography. No, they had a plan 20 years ago, 50 to get into the state, to get appointed to high positions, get into their kids were sent to to serve in the army and so on and so forth. So this is a ideology ascending, and as you said, I mean, it's a messianistic one. It's beyond comprehension. I mean, you cannot talk about what is it, Yajuj and Majuj. I don't know exactly what that is. Yagog and Magog. Today they're talking about Smotrich and I mean, these guys are living in a book that was purportedly written 3,000 whatever 2,000 years ago. So I'm saying that, whereas we have our Hamas, and Hamas is an Islamic movement. And it was based on the idea that Palestine is an Islamic waqf, and therefore any other state cannot be. But, I would say that it's Hamas between the 80s and the 2020s has transformed. I mean, it's accepted the idea of two-state solution, maybe under certain circumstances. It perpetrated one of the worst attacks and atrocities and what was suffered by Israel in its modern history. But we know that it didn't do it out of Islamic ideology. It did it because Islamic ideology was the only remaining, if you wish, framing ideology for Palestinian resistance after the PLO endorsed the peaceful 30 years road to nowhere. So, it's not simply motored. And if you take the Islam out of Palestinian resistance, it's going to still be there. It was there in the 70s, it was there in the 60s, it was there in the 90s, before the Islamic, if you wish, version of it not only entered the scene, but became ascendant. So I think now, I mean, Hamas as a ruling, as a system of government is finished, as it was for the last 15 years. Hamas as a political movement is not finished, because it's gained great support for the fact that it's the only party resisting. And however, brutal the life is that we all live on both sides because of that, I mean, we know what the conditions are to stop the resistance. The Palestinians have been very clear about the two-state solution since 1988. And spent, a whole part of it based in Ramallah, the PLO, the PA has been and continues to call for two-state negotiations, whereas there's nobody else on the Israeli side, except for Amir maybe, and his people in the streets. No, who believe that this land can be divided. So the idea has always been since 47, two states, because they're two movements, two groups of population. So how do you draw the borders? Somebody, by the way, you maybe have heard, has come out today, two Israeli and Palestinian former politicians have come out today with their plan, Olmert and Kidwa, about how to make the division and land swap. So there are formulas out there. But the problem is not the formulas of where we draw the borders. The problem is really, are the Israeli people willing to accept Palestinian national self-determination in their state, peaceful state, of course, non-violent state, probably a secular state, by the way. We have the PLO system is a secular political system. It's not based on Sharia. It's based perhaps on tribal politics more than religious politics. But that's my first contribution.
Okay, so Amir, to you, do you think are there enough liberal Israelis who are fed up with the situation, the status quo for the last 75 plus years, that are willing to accept and will fight for a fair two-state solution?
I wish we had that conversation before October 7th.
Yeah.
Because my answer would have been much different. But let me try to talk about before the October 7th. Why? Because as horrible of this war, and especially what happened in October 7th, I want to put it just for a second aside, and I'll go back to it later. And this is for a reason, is because otherwise I can't use logic. It's because it's still very emotional what happened, and it's not my emotional. It's the emotional state of the Israelis. You have to understand, Israelis are very emotional nowadays. So what I wanted to say that most, I'm talking before October 7th, most of Israel would have supported two-state solution, for sure, 100%. The thing is that you have to put a deal on the table, but such a deal that Israelis will feel comfortable with it. A deal that the Israelis will feel secure about it. Because it's very important. Israel, it's still a democracy. We have many problems with our democracy. I wouldn't say that we are a 100% democracy. We have our problem, but it is basically a democracy. And even if it wasn't a democracy, if it was a dictatorship, it doesn't matter. You need the support of the people in order for a solution to take place. You need the confidence of the citizens that will go with you. Otherwise, you'll go back to to fights in the streets or civil wars. Look at Lebanon. They had a very nice system of separation of two different minorities working together in one government, and everything broke up one day in 1976, I believe. So you do need something that will be viable. And for that to happen, it requires two ways. There are two players for this tango. We need a Palestinian to convince by their deeds that we can trust them. Same way goes for Israelis. We have to find a way to put something on the table that the Palestinians will be sure that we are going to respect whatever we are giving to them. So it has to be both ways.
Sure.
I'll
But
go back.
is there a political will in Israel to do that, given that
In
there's
Israel,
been
of course,
decades?
you see it on the street. We are there. The left movements, the major left movements that I'm sure he knows, them are there. We have the Peace Now movement, and now many small movements of Women for Peace, and something that is called movements, and a large party that is the Communist Party that represents most of it's funny to say, but the more secular Palestinians inside Israel, and with many Jewish supporters. The movements are there, and they are still. When you go to Kaplan, I invite everyone to come to see it. They are there. You see them, you hear them. People are going with banners of "We need to end the occupations." They are there. All those groups are there. But now, and I talk about after the October 7th, they are weak. They are weak not because of them. They are still very resilient. They know what they want to do. They are very strong, and they are willing to take risk in order for them. I know some guys that even today, after the October 7th, refuse to go to the army because of what is called a conscious denial. So they are there. But still, the October 7th, what have happened is the worst ever atrocity that happened to Israel since the 1940s. This is something that is really unacceptable. And this weakened all the forces, the liberals. So maybe we are there, the ones that believe that no matter what happened, a solution need to be achieved for us to live, no matter, because some horrible things happen both sides maybe. But still, we are weak. And for us to get stronger, we need the Palestinians to convince us that not only us, but to convince all the people. And we have many people in the center that are declaring that from now on, they are right wingers. Now they're going to fight the Palestinians because of what happened. There are many people like that. I think it's like a very rapid reaction for what happened. But until everything will mellow down and people will look at the history from afar, because that's the way it is, we might be able to bring all those people back, but we need them. So
Okay.
that's how I look at it. So it is possible, but we have to work very hard now in order to
Yeah.
achieve it, both sides.
Right. Great.
So
Thank you for that, Amir. Go ahead, Roger.
I think this is where this discussion now becomes interesting and serious and revealing, I hope.
I hope so.
We've taken the religion out of Amir's Zionism. Fair enough. He's renounced further settler colonialism, I believe. I mean, I think you believe that the West Bank and the OPT, so to speak, could be part of the
I believe
Palestine.
in
Should
two-state solution. I don't know.
I'm
However,
I'm assuming I'm assuming you've conceded the right of Palestinians. I mean and I take you as representative of a very important and I think you know you are very much from your thinking, in my view at least, very much as that of the Israeli mainstream, let's say, and I respect it for that reason. I don't consider you an outlier in that sense. But my point is that I think also you accept the idea of two states and two areas, separate, independent, etc. I'm assuming. Now, my understanding was that my understanding is when you take the religion out of the struggle, um, that means you also and we talk and I mentioned before the two equally entitled national movements, that of the Jewish people called Israel in a land they call Eretz Israel, and that of the Palestinian Arab people for a state of in the land they call Palestine. Um, so therefore, for me, therefore, if we're now talking, we're unequal. We've leveled the playing field, right? And now we need to find a way to sort that out, both between Israelis and between Palestinians, but also between Israelis and Palestinians. Fine. No, but we haven't leveled the playing field because you're still you're locked in the mindset of October 8th of 1,200 Israelis, innocent Israelis, let's say, murdered, many brutally, and you don't seem to have seen. You didn't mention anything of what's happened in the last 11 months. You're emotional. The Israeli people are emotional because of October 8th, 7th. And they cannot get out of that. And they're waiting, Miri Regev is desperately waiting for the next October 7th to lock it in as, their heritage, right? But you're blind to the 50,000 killed and under the rubble and the projected 100,000 additional who will eventually die because of this war, which I won't call a genocide, but the International Court of Justice is examining whether it is. Now, so we're emotional too. We're very emotional. There is mass trauma among the Palestinian people. We don't have the state institutions that Israel has to take care of that mass trauma that I totally appreciate. I read the stories of grieving parents and hostages brought back that could have been brought back alive. And I totally empathize with mothers, families, people in the streets. But you don't empathize zero with us. Sorry. Now, I'm not saying I represent the Palestinian people. Maybe there are 10 people like me that empathize. But I read Haaretz, huh? So I'm open. And my point though is that Kaplan, which is the movement, the pro-democracy, pro-judiciary, defending the judiciary, last year's movement against Netanyahu and the attempt to redefine the state of Israel by this coalition that Amir mentioned. You will remember, Amir, that the idea of these people also saying no to occupation, no to violent settlers, no to settlement expansion, no to was zero. There was no way that could happen. So this was a coalition, sure, for Israeli democracy to remain democratic for Israelis, for Jews, for the Jewish people, but not in its treatment of the Palestinians or even its citizens. Let's not forget those issues. We haven't talked about Arab Israelis and their status in Israel and their employment status, their income levels, etc., poverty, and so on and so forth. 75 years after being citizens, they're still third, fourth class citizens after the Mizrahi, after the Ethiopians, after the Druze. So there are structural issues which Amir, are there. Now you minimize them. And you say you're emotional, but I think you're emotional because you were deceived by your leaders. You were deceived by this set of leaders, and I think over time, the Israeli the Zionist leaders promised a lot more. I mean, I've been reading a book, you might have read it, by Tom Segev, an Israeli historian, called One Palestine Complete. It's a history of the mandate. And basically, it's a history of the extraordinary lengths that Ben Gurion, the Zionist movement, went to make sure that the state was established, and they knew very well that the Arabs, were against it, and since then, what we've had, and what we have, I mean, a new version of this sort of Zionism, which is not religious, by the way, you're right. It was purely nationalistic. So this is ultimately a struggle between two nationalisms, which are equally capable of atrocities, which are equally capable of building a narrative. Now, you can ask, the Zionist narrative is built according to what facts? It's built according to the facts of the Holocaust, of people wanting to set up a state because they believe now, the moment we say that the original initial justification for the establishment of the Jewish national homeland was not cultural, Amir, it was all about the return to Zion and the ingathering of the exiles, and so it was all religious. So the roots of Zionism were religious. It became a secular movement for sure. In the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, Israel was Mapai Zionism was not secular, but it was not religious, right? And it's only in the last 20 years that this turned. Anyhow, that's what I wanted to say. I mean, to add on your question. So I mean, I think that it's not enough to be atheist. I mean, to be able to look at Zionism, I think, critically, and I think you need to look at Zionism critically, just as I look at Islamic terrorism, if you want to call it that, critically, or Islamic statism, which really doesn't exist in Palestine. Because don't forget, we're a Christian Muslim population, so however strong the Islamic movement was, it was never anti-Christian.
So are the people on the ground who are suffering?
The Hamas was not an anti, Islamism in Palestine is not anti-Christian, because Palestinians are Muslims and Christians have been living together forever.
Can I ask you a question?
Pardon?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How did it happen that after Israel left Bethlehem became 85% Muslims, where it used to be 50% Muslims and Christians?
Before 1987, it was 50-50, maybe. I mean, yeah, sure. I'm not saying the Christians aren't scared, but the Muslims have not done anything to make them scared. I mean, they're just scared of the idea, maybe, of Hamas and of Daesh and of Taliban. But I'm saying the practices of the PA or the local authorities or the Muslim community have never been, in any way threatened. So it's more an idea of their fear of political Islam coming into power, which it did in Gaza. But we have, Christians and churches that have been bombed in Gaza, just like Muslims and mosques. So I mean, I don't think the issue of Hamas is beyond it was an Islamic conception of the way liberation should proceed, which was a different one than the PLO's secular conception, and the PLO's eventual very pragmatic concession of Palestine. 20% of Palestine instead of what was promised or what was suggested in 1947 was like 50-50. No, in 88 and in 94, PLO signed on to, and it still represented all the Palestinian people before Netanyahu started mucking about with Hamas, with the Gaza West Bank concept, right? Where he's had this idea that we keep it's the colonial concept of divide and rule. So the Palestinian people divided themselves. I'm not saying Netanyahu divided the Palestinians. But once we did that monumental error and didn't do what could have been done to repair it, Israel Israel, and especially Netanyahu in the last 5 or 6 years, exploited it to the full, and he's been criticized for that. The quote unquote, the concept that you can manage Gaza, manage PA. So, this idea that we have you have no partner. I mean, please re-examine what I said earlier when we were speaking before.
I didn't say that we don't have partners, but we need.
I mean, you had Abu Mazen for 25 years. Look what he's been reduced to. He's been reduced to a figurehead of authority that has no credibility, that has lost its, has not been able to achieve anything.
one of my criticism against the Netanyahu's regime, and that led to partially to October 7th, is that they supported Hamas more than they supported the Palestinian Authority. If it was up to me, I would have done it differently. And it's talking about economy, it's the problem that Netanyahu released mostly Hamas detainees and prisoners, and not and much less Fatah prisoners. He did all bunch of stuff to threaten the Hamas. This is something this is my major criticism against Netanyahu. But
Is
still,
I've seen a few
we do
Israeli
what?
journalists I've seen a few Israeli journalists speculate that Netanyahu doesn't want to get rid of Hamas because it's a convenient scapegoat for him to use.
I think that Bezalel Smotrich said it quite loudly, very early. He said that Hamas is an asset for Israel, and the Palestinian Authority is something that is bad for Israel. He said it quite bluntly on the TV. It's not something that speculated. They believe that as long as Hamas exists, then we won't be able to discuss concession for a Palestinian state.
Right.
That's
So
that's a
it's
criticism.
so they
That's what
don't
they
want to
do.
get rid of because as long as Hamas is there, they can use it as a they can weaponize the rhetoric to say, oh, we can't have a two-state solution because we have these
Exactly.
terrorists on our
Look,
border.
it's well known that in the early days of Hamas, before the first Intifada, this is documented in books. I'm sure Amir is aware of it. The Israeli intelligence were allowing Hamas to establish itself in mosques and charitable societies politically in Gaza as a counterweight to the PLO factions. So that changed, of course. But the idea that yes, I mean it's classic colonial divide and rule, as I said, strategy. It's nothing more than that. It's not, if right now, if the total elimination of Hamas was possible, and Netanyahu could get away with it, I'm sure he'd be happy to live with that because it would give him such a place in history, quote unquote. But he knows damn well that there'll be a new Hamas. I mean, we all know that you can wipe out. Look at the history. How many times, failingly, Palestinians have risen up. Fails in 36 to 39, and it was suppressed and misdirected and poorly led. The first Palestinian mass uprising, if you wish, armed uprising against Zionist settlement, well before the state. And then when the state was established in 48, the Nakba was more of a defense movement from the Palestinians and a show of supposed solidarity by the Arabs, which the Israelis cleverly manipulated into looking like this invasion of these Arab armies. But they were ready for it, and they were able to repulse it, and the Palestinians paid the price then. And then we've had other uprisings. Lebanon was, in a sense, the PLO in Lebanon. Look what happened there. 87 began with stone throwing, but ended up with armed gangs in Nablus and the West Bank. The second Intifada also began by an Israeli, Sharon, barging into the Haram, the
I think that was an
compound.
excuse.
Yeah, it was an excuse, but it created what was very soon turned into a military intifada in the 2000s, which Arafat paid his life, if you wish for, and so on and so forth. So we haven't had a glorious record of success in achieving, but for many different reasons, which we don't need to go into. But the point is, the recurrence of these mass armed cells, different levels, uprisings. They keep talking now about when is the third intifada in the West Bank going to happen. I mean, it's been happening for the last 3-4 years, to be honest, and this year
Actually,
in
we felt
particular.
that it is starting right now.
Well, I think it's been going on since, before the war, because what was going on in Jerusalem and the West Bank were all sort of, precursors, at least, to that, to what's happening now in a sense. But anyhow, I mean, so what I'm saying is, though, only that, yeah, you can wipe out militarily Hamas. Another year, they could probably literally destroy every single person and military capacity that Hamas retains in Gaza. But West Bank, it's not only Hamas. In the West Bank, it's everybody. And if they go too far in the West Bank, Smotrich, as they're now pushing, They've pulled out of the two cities that were invaded for 10 days, Jenin and Tulkarm. Maybe there's some agreement with the PA about trying to calm things down. But you have armed cells around the West Bank, which are teaching themselves how to do things, poorly trained, probably getting arms smuggled in through Jordan, from Israel, of course. Easy to get arms from Israel. Arab gangs from Israel, criminal gangs who were penetrating Arab society and rotting it from within in Israel, are also establishing themselves in the West Bank. The Shin Bet, the Israeli security services, have an eye on this, and they, I don't know what they know and what they don't know. So, but the point is that there is now because of what we've seen in Gaza, and because that people have a real, Amir might think it's ridiculous and it's not going to happen, but we heard that before Gaza. There's a real fear of any prolonged resistance in the West Bank will bring Gazification of the different battle zones that have already been, like Jenin and Tulkarm, etc. And now you have, like today, Jericho has been closed off because of this bridge incident. So this sort of a constant confrontation, even though really, the PA, the governing authority, has stayed out of the fighting. Ultimately, I don't know how long it's not really a sustainable sort of, it's low intensity but prolonged military conflict. There should be a ceasefire in the West Bank, by the way. I mean, I've been saying this since the beginning of the war. The PA should be demanding a ceasefire and it make itself relevant again. Because to be honest, a ceasefire in Gaza and change of hostages, etc., whereas what's going on today and has been going on in the West Bank continues unabated, and subject to Joe Biden feeling a little bit vindictive because Netanyahu has been dissing him, so he'll sanction some settler group or some settler criminal. I mean, that's not enough. That's not going to stop as long as this coalition that was really well described by Amir, this tripartite coalition holds together in Israel.
And so you mentioned like there's been these multiple failed uprisings. Several Israeli journalists have said that what's been happening both before and since October 7th is not making Israel more secure. It's actually making it more dangerous because you're creating a whole new generation of people who feel they have nothing left to lose and will turn to violence. But what is your general sense of the people in Gaza who are suffering? Have a lot of them lost a taste for the violence and want to see a
Sure.
peace?
They
Or
never had a taste. They never had a taste for the violence. I mean, the taste for the violence is 30,000, 40,000 well-trained elite commandos and a political, environment incubator, 100,000, their families and whatever they might be, right? Who didn't have a penchant for violence. They decided that after 15 years of siege and Israeli promises to give them some money and let the humanitarian goods in and all of that, they decided they would do things differently. And so they established a military-industrial complex in Gaza. And that military-industrial complex has been in action for the last year. Now, it's not a penchant for, it's not people who decide, they decided violence was the only way, but not because of their great love for violence, because this guy Sinwar was in prison in Israel for many years and learned a lot about Israel, and I think devised a lot of these ideas after, his experiences with Israeli jailers, etc. I just, the thing about Israel being safe or not safe. Amir, I don't know if you noticed yesterday, Rabin's granddaughter has left Israel. She said, "Khalas, finished. It's not. My home is now in New York. I have no other home." So, I mean, this is telling.
Even before that, so it's not something new.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying this is it's symbolic, is all I'm saying. I'm not saying there's any mass immigration, but there's you read up reports about doctors, high professionals. Khalas, I mean, this was happening last year, before the war. Come on, I mean, Berlin has a huge Israeli emigre, elite, the best of the best, the sanest of the sane, the most human of the humanists. So anyhow, I mean, Israel is definitely not. Sorry. I'll just finish.
Okay,
but Israeli demonstrators, everybody since October 7th, the kibbutz communities, the borderline, they've been saying, Israel's job is to make Jews safe, and we're no longer safe, and we're living in fear. And yesterday I was reading something about school children and the in Israel and the trauma effect on those who were directly exposed to trauma and those who in the center who weren't, and all of this stuff. So the underlying premise, hence Netanyahu has such fire in his belly, and hence he's able to push this war forward into areas where all rational military people are saying don't go, because he's saying this: we have to reestablish that Israel is the safe haven for the Jewish people, that it will take revenge on Amalek for any for what it's done to us. And if he doesn't, that's the end of him. And to be honest, it's the end of the promise of religious Zionism that they're bringing the Messiah. That what they're doing is hastening the arrival of the Messiah, because that's what they really believe, and that's what many of them believe, at least. Sorry, you wanted to say something else.
I want to say some stuff to reply to some stuff that you said in the little time that we have left. I'll just answer the last questions. You can never kill a religious idea. Okay, so they'll understand that the Messiah didn't come this time. Maybe he will come 10 years from now, and everything will come back, and we'll go to another conflict, and everybody will forget what happened in the past. That's how it goes, religious. Too bad, but that's what it is. I forgot many stuff that I wanted to say, but you said something about whether we are in the liberal forces in Kaplan are thinking about the people in Gaza. Yes, I think it crosses our mind, but I'm really sorry to say that. But if you go to the Maslow pyramid, we first have to think about ourselves. Going and looking more broader to more terms and think, we're not there. We are feeling that we are living in a surviving war. That's our feeling, and as long as we are there, it's hard for us to look forward. I know it's hard to say, because as a humanistic, I can really feel well if by mistake I run over a cat or something. But still, when you look at on the overall from the top, no, we are busy counting our dead right now. I really hope that we'll be able to go to the next step, because that will mean that we are healthier in our side. No, we are sick now. We can't think more than forward than that. So this is something that I really felt like I need to say. And about the Palestinian Authority, as I said in the middle of your talk, yes, I think we should find a way to threaten them. They have to be stronger. But we have to find the liberal forces within the Palestinians that will join us together in order to help us take both societies to the next level, so we can talk peace.
Thank you.
We can't do it now, but let's hope that in 1 year or so we'll be able to start something toward that.
Yeah, I think a year is a reasonable time frame for everybody to recover from their trauma. If the trauma doesn't continue for another year, God forbid. Sorry, am I allowed to say God on this platform?
Raja, where do you see the Palestinian people going over the next year? Do you see a peace process developing, or this is just going to be prolonged?
Good. No, that's a good question. It's relevant. I'm sure people who are listening are more interested in that than the discussion parts of the discussion we've had about ideology. I could start there by saying, people in Gaza, because all Palestinians now give, anything that comes from Gaza, anything the people in Gaza say, whatever they say is, for us, correct. Anybody that's gone through what they've gone through, we feel, have an entitlement to say believe what they want to believe, and demand what they feel is rightfully theirs. Okay, that's the mood in the West Bank, at least, which is a sort of a deference to their sacrifice and to our acknowledgement of how difficult it's going to be to repair that. And opinion polls say some different things, but clearly Hamas, nobody wants Hamas to go back to government. Maybe 10%, 5%, 15%. Nobody wants Hamas to do another October 7th. So in a sense, people, I think, understand that whatever impact the strategy of going after Israel in the way that Hamas did on October 7th, the impacts that it's having, and I think, and the structural flaws in Israel that it's revealing on different levels, people understand that that's the most that Palestinians could possibly militarily ever do to Israel. Okay, I think that doesn't mean people will not continue to believe in the right to defend themselves. So whereas Gaza is in some ways will be very easy to pacify from the Israeli, let's say, security perspective. And they've Philadelphia route, they've paved it, the Netzarim route, so that Israel doesn't seem like it's going anywhere soon. At least it's not showing that it's planning to, for sure. Now, that means that in Gaza there's a chance, but not under Israeli occupation. There's a chance of recovery for the next year or so. Relief should be allowed to proceed 100%, which is relief for everybody you're talking about, not just for half of the people, everybody, 2+ billion. And recovery, there are different forms of economic and human social recovery can take, but it will take a year or two before we can talk about reconstruction. But if at the same time Israel is pursuing a different sort of war in the West Bank, with the PA still supposedly recognized by the world as the legitimate representative of the Palestinians, then that's a different matter. And so we're preparing for a different scenario. We're preparing for a sort of a resistance by different means, political as well as diplomatic, as well as military, whoever's going to do that. But it's not a coordinated strategy. The people who want to resist on the ground are going to do it whether or not the president accepts that. In fact, all of what's happened is despite the objection of the PLO to that sort of armed resistance. So that's going to continue. Sporadic, more, less, dramatic, whatever. Engage everybody. Israel will continue its clampdown, continue its closures, will continue its expropriation. Every day they're taking new land and declaring it settlements. So this is an explosion. This is a pressure cooker that I thought would have exploded 6 months ago at Rafah with 2 million people crammed against that border and desperate to get out. It didn't. Israel was able to herd them into other areas. But West Bank is similar now. So, prepared for the two-state solution. I'm doing studies about the two-state, economic studies right now about the two-state solution. I'm, literally, for Palestinians who are still somehow believing that it might happen. But you ask Joe Biden about that. Don't ask the Palestinians. Ask Joe Biden and of course Netanyahu, who's resolutely against it. But the Palestinians, even Sinwar, even the Hamas spokesman, every time they have a chance to say establishment of the independent Palestinian state, which means West Bank, Gaza Strip, but a full state, all of the territory, no settlements. That's the condition. That's the Palestinian condition for a two-state solution. But it would be a state that would be at peace with Israel as long as Israel is at peace with us.
And are you confident that can happen?
Not with the current crowd. Amir will answer better, but certainly not with these people who are in power. So I'm waiting for the demonstrators to remove this government. We are. And if that happens, then everything we can talk. Here you have, I said, Ehud Olmert and Nasser Qudwa have announced their scheme for. So there are plenty of people willing to talk about peace in Palestine. But you show me somebody else besides Amir and a few others. Yair Golan, the head of the Labour Party.
And on the Palestinian side, so like the
I told you the PLO and Hamas are officially committed to it. Now Hamas, you can argue, is it a tactic but that remains the Palestinian people's willingness. Nobody likes the idea of two states because we've been so messed about with. But we're willing to accept it. We remain willing to accept it. We don't believe any longer that it can happen because of what Israel is doing on the ground and because of the people who are in power in Israel. Change those two factors, the dynamics will change.
Right. Okay,
Can I reply?
sure. Go ahead.
Sure.
It's kind of a conclusion, but I'm going forward with what I just said. I think that we'll be able to drop Netanyahu. I'm pretty sure that in the beginning of October, we'll have a no confidence call in the Knesset, and Israel will go for
Good.
election. I'm also sure that the government that will rise after the election will be center left with a strong right wing, a center right, but it will go toward the left. But I know something that is very dim from my perspective. And this is that it, because of demographic reasons, because of what Roger mentioned before, that there are many kids in the religious neighborhoods are willing to take over Israel from the religious perspective and to control Israel. So I am afraid that even if the center left will win the next election, I believe we will, as I said, it might be our last chance to achieve a deal. And we really have to work very hard after that to do something to solve it because this way can continue. No matter
Israel's in the border of civil strife. You're right.
Yeah. Are
what.
you confident the center left is going to win? Like there's so much discontent with Netanyahu
As
and the
of
right.
now, when you look at the public polls that are being published, that's what you see.
Okay,
I
that's
believe
good to
that we
see.
have a strong right-wing party led by Bennett, that was the last prime minister.
Center right, you mean? Instead of Netanyahu in that case, right?
Instead of Netanyahu, I see
With Ben
Netanyahu.
Gvir leading the rest of the national religious.
I hope they'll go to the trash of history,
Inshallah.
for my opinion.
Again, God.
Yeah. So like yeah, that's
And this is
that's
something that
people.
even the Palestinians should work very hard.
Look,
And
we
this
agree on this absolutely about the trash bin.
okay. But
And
I
I
want to
fully
agree about
concur.
the stuff. We need to work very hard after the election to achieve peace because it might be that our last chance.
Yeah, and I fully
I
concur
agree.
that Netanyahu's been a major obstacle to peace. Like for decades, he's been an obstacle for peace. Okay, so let's jump to a couple questions from our viewers. So we have August Berkshire, who is actually one of the vice president of AEI, asked the same question that I had. Why haven't the UN peacekeeping forces been brought in? Is this something Israel is going to refuse to allow because they think this is a domestic issue, or any ideas on why the UN has not been brought in? Go ahead, Raja.
I'll quickly, two reasons. Israel certainly has never accepted the idea of international peacekeepers in any status in the Palestinian-Israeli areas, yeah, ever, except one instance where they allowed observers into Hebron, but that was Netanyahu by then. Anyhow, so there's a principle about that, and they're not going to ever, whoever's in power in Israel, right, left, whatever. That's one reason. But I think the most important reason is, where is the UN besides the amazing humanitarian work it's been doing? But where is the UN Security Council? And the answer to that is DC, and the answer to that is Joe Biden and the way in which he's allowed Israel to get away with impunity with what it's been doing, and not imposed the UN's will. But that's not only in this case. We know the UN is a reduced animal globally. So nobody so simply UN peacekeeping forces do not get involved in establishing peace and security when the parties involved or concerned are not willing to insert them, and there's nobody willing to insert them right now.
Fair enough. Yeah, the one of the issues that I was thinking of, sorry, not issue, one of my a colleague of mine sent me a Jewish podcast. It's a secular Jewish group in the United States. I forget their name, and I listened to their podcast, and they actually mentioned that Biden is not going to withstand the test of history, that he is going to have been shown by arming Israel and refusing to rein in Netanyahu, that he has been on the wrong side of history on this. Would that be something both of you agree with? That the Americans uh, should have been doing more to stop the violence? Amir,
There
I know
have
you're
been
shaking.
at least two histories, two moments where United States presidents did the right thing and stopped, restrained Israel. 82, Reagan with the bombing of Beirut, and 91 was it, or 92, Bush, Baker's selling Shamir, you have my phone number, call me when you're ready to talk peace, for example. And they were threatening in both cases sanctions or withholding arms, etc. That beyond that, Obama tried to give them a slap on their wrist when he left with the resolution considering settlements illegal, but it had no effect in the United Nations Security Council. So yeah, I think Biden is definitely on the wrong side of the right, U.S. positions over history, but
Okay,
could have done more.
I need to elaborate why I'm absolutely against what was said. So, if you want
About
to,
the peacekeeping, about
I
peacekeeping,
think
or what
that
I said.
I think that Biden did a good job. We had, we needed him. He was on the right side of history. I wouldn't want to think what would happen to me personally if he wouldn't involve in securing us. And I think that's the right thing. We have the right to exist also. And
But
he was right in his
Well, he did the right thing by Israel, maybe. Yes, he did the right thing by Israel, but he didn't do the right thing by Palestine. That's important, though. I mean, aren't we
so,
even, I thought we leveled the playing field.
but that couldn't that the peacekeepers have played a role there? That the Americans sent UN peacekeepers in,
If
restrained
there was
them.
a
Yeah,
level playing field, yes, there
right.
could have been.
Yeah,
But Israel gets away with things that nobody else gets away with, and that we certainly don't get away with. I mean, the PA has to just talk to a Hamas leader for it to be threatened with sanctions, whereas you have, leaders in the Israeli government who are being openly declared to be violent settlers, and nobody's sanctioning them. So, the double standards is an old story in the Palestinian-Israeli struggle, and this is double standards. Come on,
about
Amir.
the illegal doing of settlers in Israel. Some of them are being arrested, some of them are put in on trial. I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
hope it will continue.
Inshallah.
I think it's not done enough, but I
Or
think
systematically.
it's not as good as we wanted it, but I think it is being done, and if the government will change, I hope it will be enforced more strictly.
Well, let's see what happens with the inquiries into the treatment of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli concentration camps over the last year.
So after Hamas executed 6 Palestinians,
You see, but
another
that's what.
million, I wouldn't care less. Sorry.
Come on, really? 2,000 Palestinians being abused sexually on a daily basis
Nobody
because
is abused.
you wouldn't be bothered by that, but you
No,
are by six
no, I don't. Nobody is
the
being
execution of
targeted.
6 hostages. I don't understand how you
There
can.
was one. There was one case of sexual assault, and the guys that are responsible are in jail now,
Well, I
or at
think you
least
need to read.
arrested.
You need
Because
to
the
read the
guy,
Israeli. You need to read Israeli civil rights organizations. It's not one case. We know that. Anyhow, let's not
yeah.
let's not
There's
argue at
there's
the end of this
we won't get it.
otherwise very positive discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. So we do have another question here. It can be taken, the way I read it, it can be taken a couple of different ways. The question is, isn't Palestine resistance gaslighting the whole world? Now, you could kind of read that both ways. Now, I would say the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves, especially if there are abuses going on. Obviously, the terrorism is not condoned, but what's the phrase? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And, I've seen Israeli journalists speculate. You have this Palestinian people, they feel that they've lost everything, they have nothing left to lose, and so they turn to violence. So Raja, and to you, Amir, as well. What are your opinions on the resistance, Palestinian resistance to what can be classed as, what actually have been Israeli abuses, like such as like the West Bank illegal settlements,
Gaslighting
the West Bank
meaning what?
terrorist.
Gaslighting the whole world. Where
That's what I'm.
it's making it's forcing the whole world into acknowledging things which otherwise it shouldn't be forced to acknowledge. I don't understand.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a bit the way it's phrased that you can kind of look at it from both directions. Like, are they pretending that they're not terrorists, or are they pretending that they're freedom fighters, kind of thing. So
Okay.
so
You
yeah,
want
I,
to
I mean,
say?
I would say the Palestinians have a right to self-determination, have a right to defend themselves, you know. Would you agree, Amir?
Is that right also to rape women? Is that the right to explode buses inside Israel, kill kids?
Okay, but
You
what
know
No,
what?
but
what about the West Bank?
those aspects of
It's
Palestinian violent resistance.
I almost saw in my own eyes when I was a kid, when a kid was thrown in a bus. You have to put.
Amir,
As
but don't those don't
let me finish. I do believe that war crimes should be looked at. If there are mistakes, they should be fought on against, even if Israel did them. But it also include the way resistance, as you call them, are applying to Israelis. This is why you can't have war crime only if a state doing it, and I think and call a resistance to give an excuse for a terrorist group to eat civilians.
Okay,
But
but what about what
let's
Israel
take
is doing?
let's take the ICJ, i.e. that not ICC, which has now issued warrants or may issue warrants for both sides, right? For leaders Hamas as well as Israeli leaders, which in a sense is not, I mean, a refutation of what you're saying, Amir, but I mean, your point is that basically I think you believe that Palestinian war crimes outweigh by far Israeli war crimes. So whereas Israeli war crimes are being done under the right to self-defense, our war crimes are being done without provocation or whatever. I don't know if that's I'm ascribing to you. I don't mean to be ascribing to you things, but that's
Every
what I'm.
case for itself.
Pardon?
Every case for itself.
Whatever. Okay, every case with itself. So yeah, I mean, I think two things I would say. If we're going by international law, people struggling for the right for their self-determination and denied that self-determination for 75 years have the right to resist occupation and resist those who are denying them that right. And they also have the right to do it by armed resistance as long as they're targeting the military forces of the occupier.
The
So in
military.
my view, in my definition, anything beyond that is a war crime. And that's what the United Nations says about what happened on October 7th, but also what happened in the last 11 months since October 7th. And I think those are the right parameters to go by. I don't like to, for my compatriots, for what they did and the way they did it, to be judged as war criminals. But if they're going to be, and Israelis who did the same thing are going to be judged, then I accept it. But not, our war criminals are more criminal than yours. I don't accept that.
So, like Amir, what do you think about the Israelis, the extremists in the West Bank? You know, the settler violence. What do you disavow that? I would presume that you do.
No, I think that the disobedience in the West Bank by the Israelis should be taken care of very harshly. I do believe that those people should be detained, put on trials, get punishment. This is something that, from my point of view, is unacceptable at any circumstances.
Right. And so
Very simple, because this is
it's
what they're doing is they're targeting civilians, sometimes for no reasons. It's something that I can't accept, sorry.
right. And you,
Even if
you would
there's
concur the West Bank settlements should all be removed. You would concur,
I
especially as a
believe that
first step.
I believe that most of them should be either removed or find a solution,
Swapped.
land
That's what.
swap, maybe change citizenship but stay on the same land. There are all bunch of solutions. There
Been
are,
studied extensively in the past. Lots of solutions
So,
for
Mr.
sharing,
Raja,
sharing,
are,
sharing sovereignty, sharing land, sharing whatever. Yeah.
do you think a swap would be
So yeah, I
workable,
mean the
Raja?
PLOs, everybody, the PA and the PLOs signed up to a swap, but it's a question of how much for how much and how much. There's arguments there, of course. And that was 20 years ago. They were talking about a 3%, 5%. I don't know what it is. Remain, of the of the West Bank be allocated, allowed to become part of Israel, so to speak. I don't know what the percentages are now. I mean, I can imagine sitting in a negotiation with Smotrich, and he'll say, "Well, yeah, we'll give you 5% of Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank now, and whatever." So, but in principle, yeah, if there's a partner, but this, like Amir said, we're a ways from talking about that sort of thing. It's
Well, it's
important.
not just not just a what would be the word, like just ripping out the settlements altogether, like negotiated swap
Look, the
with them,
UN,
etc.
again, if some people will swear by the Bible of the United Nations resolutions, and other people will say shmum, shum, as the UN, Israeli said, UN, shmum, doesn't matter. UN's unimportant. But the UN originally said removal, dismantling the settlements. But the PLO and the Israelis were arguing about retaining some, and then the others being whatever
Right.
given as part of the compensation maybe that would have been owed to the Palestinians for Israeli occupation, whatever. I don't know what the plans were for the smaller ones.
Okay.
Anyhow, so that's not. But again, that's really a secondary issue when we're
Okay.
talking about these essential ideas about who is more criminal than the other. By what standards do we accept that all parties be judged or evaluated? Are there some special rights for the Jewish people in Palestine that nobody's told us about that we should know about that are not religious, things like that. Because as long as the idea that Israeli and Jewish or Jewish nationalism is not symmetric with Palestinian nationalism, as long as that idea persists, because for under whatever reason, because look, we made peace with them, and then look what happened from Gaza, all of that stuff. Put that as that rhetoric and that demagoguery and that sort of uh, hasbara, if I may use the word, aside. Uh, Effectively, the Palestinians, I think, are still ready for peace with the Israelis, but not on certain terms of surrender,
Right.
which is what Netanyahu is trying to impose in Gaza, and which ultimately, if he were ever to go back to the negotiating table, he would try to, as long as it's him running the show, if he were to ever go to a negotiating table. So, let's talk about getting, like Amir was saying, a change in Israel and not a civil war in Israel. Let's hope change happens democratically, etc., and not degenerates into all these people who. And by the way, the religious nationalists are not only in the West Bank settlements. They're deep in the heart of Jerusalem, of Arab Jerusalem, trying to Judaize it, and in Arab cities in Israel. So it goes beyond, it's from the river to the sea. So their aspirations and their thinking. So Israeli liberals refer to the state of Judea Samaria versus the state of Israel. And that could become more than just an ideological struggle. It could indeed become, these people have been, about Ben Gvir handing out or licensing tens of thousands of personal arms, etc. How we've seen how that's degenerated in Arab society in Israel, where now, believe it or not, families in different quarters of villages chip in. They all chip in for the family arsenal, so that there are a few guns held by family members, so that in case they're attacked by criminal gangs, they can respond. Can you believe that?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what it's degenerated to, and under the eye of Israeli security, don't know, but everybody knows that. And because no resources, of course, are put into battling this crime wave, because again, divide and rule, let the Arabs kill themselves. And now that's the fear is that will now intermix with all of this Israeli settlements. I mean, it's a mess, you can get into the West Bank as an Israeli. The Palestinians will think you're a Palestinian. The Israelis, you can yellow plates, etc. It's mishmash. It's terrible. Separation. We have to separate. I think we all agree. We need to separate. Not necessarily behind walls, but each one in their own thing. And we have interactions, sure, trade, workers, but not occupy, not run each other's lives.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should
Yeah.
we
So
should we bring the should we
I just have one more question here, and it ties into you, Roger. So the article you wrote that led me to you on the Marshall Plan for Palestine. So we have a question here from Faye that is somewhat related to that about how can a reconciliation happen with so many Palestinians displaced? Where will they go? So with your Marshall Plan for Palestine, how long, like with all of the destruction and the infrastructure that's been destroyed, what is your prognosis, your diagnosis for what will happen, what needs to happen, and how long it's going to take?
Well, I mean, if I'm not sure which reconciliation this is Faye is referring to, but if it's a Palestinian reconciliation, i.e., between Hamas, which was running Gaza, and the PA and the PLO, then that is not really related to how many Palestinians are displacing. It doesn't really, that equation is not affected by that issue. It's affected by other issues to do with power and money and ability to govern and willingness to govern and people to do the job on the boots on the ground and all of that. That's where that's you know what that's the reconciliation requires a different set of issues, or is about a different set of issues. With so many Palestinians in the place in Gaza, where will they go? No, I mean they're going to stay in Gaza. The question is, can there be an urgent international intervention at this moment? And I'm not talking about reconstructing what is. We're now told about 70% of Gaza has to be rebuilt. Um, Including all of its roads and all of its utilities and economic infrastructure, and of course homes, offices, public buildings, etc. Um, it's not We're not there yet, and where we are is how with all of these displaced Gazans, where do they live? Where are they going to live this coming winter? Are they going to remain in these tents in the mud, in the cold, deprived of basic needs, subject to chaotic, even gang warfare as well? Um, or is the international community going to start working urgently on temporary, decent shelter? So this is sort of the issues that we should be talking about. And if that is the case, how is it going to be done? Is it going to be done by rebuilding, materials? How are you going to bring in materials? Are you going to construct these shelters in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, et cetera, et cetera? There's a whole set of issues that I think that's number one. When you ask me about so many Palestinians displaced in Gaza and where will they go, it's a question of who is doing the job of starting to prepare for that. And to my understanding, nobody yet. So none of the international humanitarian aid has been able to go beyond providing food, medicine, basic goods. The commercial flows are only food, medicines, basic goods. So there's no equipment coming in. There's no raw materials coming in. And there's no authority, most importantly, left in place. And Netanyahu doesn't want, he's appointed a civil administrator now, a government administrator from the army, which means they're planning to stay. So if we're talking about the next year under Israeli occupation and rule of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians displaced, they're going to stay right where they are now. I mean, however they are displaced, as long as military operations were to stop, there's no homes to go back to. People will try and relocate if they're in the middle of Gaza and their houses in the north, but they've been forced to flee to the middle several times. Once there's peace, they will certainly try to relocate their temporary shelter to the north, and so on and so forth. People will try to go back to where they lived. If there's a house, they'll live in it. If there's a half of a house, if there's no house, they'll set up their tent next to it. So that'll happen spontaneously like that. The point is that nobody is organizing. And Israel is actively not allowing it to happen, or is
And
not doing what needs to be done to allow it to happen.
and with your Marshall Plan, is this going to be like a generational time frame to implement something of that scale?
I didn't use the term Marshall Plan. That was the editors. I didn't want that word
Okay,
because I didn't want
okay,
that constant reference. I don't think it's that.
okay.
It's the point is that the international community, Israel, and the Arabs are going to have to pay for this. The Palestinian people can't pay for it. That's all I'm saying. Now, in the laws, international laws that some people will apply selectively in the case of Palestine and Israel, there's something called reparations. And reparations, just like the Jewish people have benefited until today of reparations for the Holocaust from Germany, a genocide that thankfully did not eliminate the Jewish people. It killed 6 or whatever million of them, but it did not eliminate them, as we see very, very vividly. But my point is that there was a historic injustice perpetrated against the Jewish people, which the victors recognized that the vanquished had to pay for. Now, we're not going to have a victor and a vanquished in the case of Palestine and Israel. If we ever get anywhere, it's supposed to be not a zero-sum game, but both should benefit. But that doesn't annul the principle that we have been suffered material, resource, human damage over 75 years at the hands of the state of Israel, and there are certain things accounts to be put on the table. How you settle them, what do you exchange them for? I'm sure Israel considers the same. But Israel has traditionally put Palestinian rights to reparations against rights to the reparations to Arab Jews who left Arab countries after the state of Israel was founded and lost their property, etc., etc. So I know that that's the game, but anyhow, that doesn't deny the fact that we need to make the account and see who is responsible. And then you have, the Arab states, whose inaction, I think, if nothing else, as brethren, they could make up for by generously supporting rapid recovery, at least. And reconstruction we'll do by ourselves. Let us recover properly. I think the Palestinians, believe it or not, will build a lot of this on their own with their own resources, the homes and things, at least.
So are you confident then that this is going to come to fruition? Like as we
Not at all confident. No, I'm not confident. I'm just telling you how it should come to fruition.
Okay.
I'm very. I have no confidence that any of these good, the right things will happen. Every time I did over the last 12 months, and Netanyahu keeps surprising us.
Yeah.
To be honest,
So
Rafah, Philadelphia, we haven't finished yet.
yeah. So as we talked about earlier, we need the center left. We need assurances that Israel
We need
is
people of faith. We need people of good faith, not faith, good faith, good intentions, humanists, and people who are, devoid of the emotion and de-emotionalized, let's say.
Yeah.
I mean, Amir, I appreciate very much you were able to describe the emotional state of our Israeli people without being without showing it yourself. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yalla.
So,
I think that's great.
right.
Okay.
So we need the saner minds to prevail, and then we can start moving forward. So okay. All right.
I might conclude that we need to release all the hostages that are in Gaza as soon as possible. I think that will lead the way to stop all hostilities and start recover, because we need it. But it has to start with the release of all the hostages as soon as possible.
Right. Do you think that's likely to happen, Raja?
It has to happen.
But do you think Hamas will?
Look, I read the wrong press. I read Haaretz, and Haaretz, they all say that Netanyahu doesn't care about the hostages, and if it allows his career to be prolonged, he will not necessarily do anything to release those that are still alive. So that's my source
That's what we feel in the protest.
That's the general feeling of the liberal Israelis who understand what's going on. That yes, there is a chance that Hamas is still willing and can, and a deal could be made, which obviously doesn't delete Hamas. That's really what Netanyahu is no longer. It's clearly he's from the beginning said we want to dismantle completely, defeat. So he's still, to be honest, he's consistent with his total victory goal. But A, can Israel achieve total victory? It appears not. And B, do the Israeli people care any longer about total victory versus those remaining 50, 60 who are still alive? I think no, they don't. So it shows a certain sanity, these most recent poll, that 60% of the Israeli people consider the hostages more important than the Philadelphia corridor or whatever. So that's maybe a sign of hope for the sort of transformation that Amir was referring to, after October.
Well, let's hope that this.
We're happy. We'll be very satisfied with that. We don't want any more for now. That would be great for redefining the dynamics. Let's say it would totally redefine the dynamic, regardless of what happens to Hamas and PLO.
Okay.
In fact, it would determine the final, agreement on that Palestinian reconciliation was.
Okay. All right. Well, we've been talking for an hour and a half, so we should probably wrap up. And thank you guys and our panel, our audience as well. So just maybe give you guys one chance to just give us your final thoughts on what you think each side needs to do, just to sum up. So Amir, you want to go first?
I kind of said it before, we have to finish to release the hostages. That's the most important thing I can think of. We
And the
have
election.
to, but in the long term, we need to educate both Israelis and Palestinians we need to understand that we're here to stay. Israelis, Jews, Palestinians, we're here to stay, and we have to find a way to live together. That's my dream, my hope. When I was young, I used to go with my parents to Hebron and to Nablus. Since my father was working with many people from the States, Christians, they used to take them to all the Christian places in the West Bank. And I felt very comfortable going there as a kid, but I still remember it. And everybody knew him because we did it very often. I wish that it will come back and we'll be safe to go there.
Thank you for a measured answer and thoughtful response. Let's hope that can happen. August has just posted here, if Hamas released the hostages, wouldn't that basically undermine Netanyahu? So why
No,
wouldn't Hamas
it would
release?
enable him to continue to destroy the rest of the 30% of Gaza looking for Yahya Sinwar. That's all it would do. And not have to give away any, I mean, even if he were to release whatever number of Palestinian prisoners, which is part of the deal, of course. Let's not forget that there are 10,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons. So, the deal is partly about Israeli hostages, which we've heard a lot about, but nobody seems to talk about the Palestinian hostages, the 10,000. So, so I would have just said, I'm all with the nostalgic and, really warm hopes of Amir, and I wouldn't add to except to say equal playing field, and I don't see one yet. And until there is one, both in terms of how we judge the history, but also in terms of how we apportion what remains of this land and the peoples on it, I would say that. And until the Israelis are willing to treat us like we treat them and or expect us to treat, I mean, point is, it really has to be and it's not a level playing field. It's not a level playing field on the ground. It's not a level playing field in the minds of Israelis. And the idea that somehow they are more entitled to their national home than we are to ours. And it's not in the minds of the global community, which continue to feed on this trope of, Palestinians wanting to this conflation of anti-Semitism and being against Israel, the conflation of what, Hamas's religiousness with its resistance, to occupation sort of ideology, all of those things. So that narrative, of course, which is the United States, well, the world, I mean, global public opinion has pushed back against that. So there's no gaslighting. Global public opinion has woken up. That's all. Now, in ways that are sometimes expressed with some ignorance and with malice, etc. Sure, but ultimately that's what's been happening. So don't blame us for asking the world to apply the same standards to us as they apply to Ukraine.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very
Nice to
much,
meet you
gentlemen.
all. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
I
Raja.
think to
Thank you.
Tel Aviv it's only 15 minutes drive.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody, and we're out. Take care. Bye bye.
Atheist Alliance International. Welcome to the world of atheism.